You wanna come out, so come out.
ルースターティースのファンの皆さん、こんにちは。山寺宏一です。私今回ジェンロックで活躍を演じることになりました。来年が待ちきれません。ぜひ楽しみにしてください。See you soon online.
Hey, mama, father, walk down the street and I'm Bobito. And I'm mama, hey, father, walk in the streets, rock is get to.
American-produced mecha is a pretty interesting category of the genre to look at. Often widely ignored by the broader mecha fanbase online or talked about as more of a side dish, I've always felt this is somewhat unfair. There's a decent amount of American mecha media out there that shows a legitimate love and understanding for the genre that flourished in Japan. Megas XLR, Symbionic Titan, Robot Jocks, The Iron Giant, Battletech. There's plenty of great mecha out there that isn't Japanese. Though some of the time, under an awful set of circumstances, what starts off as a decent idea on paper can collapse in on itself, leading to a nightmare production of a first season, and perhaps the worst second season of any show I've ever watched. I'm talking about the CG animated mecha series, GENLOCK, with a focus on its disastrous second season in particular. A show that didn't sound so bad on paper, GENLOCK is a fascinating watch that I do not recommend, but one thing I can tell you is that I've never seen a show implode in on itself quite this badly. The series was the brainchild of Gray G. Haddock, who around 2014 became the head of the newly found Rooster Teeth animation studio, a studio headlined by well-respected web animator the late Monty and his original series, RWBY, as well as Rooster Teeth's own influential long-running machinima, Red vs. Blue. With the continued success of their two flagship animated shows, this new dedicated branch was a no-brainer, but the tragic passing of Monty in February of 2015 put a heavy weight on the shoulders of this newly formed studio. But despite this horrible loss, the studio would continue to move forward, and by 2016, RT Animation had become the largest and arguably most profitable branch of the company, ballooning in staff size and getting its own dedicated studio, moving to an increased output of shows to diversify their content. Shows such as the 2D adult animated series Camp Camp, as well as the more serialized Nomad of Nowhere, created by Gordon Whitman. Keep his name in mind, as we'll get back to that a bit later. In 2017, sometime in the middle of production of RWBY's 5th season, Gray, using his position as the head of the animation department, would pitch a show that he had wanted to make for years, an animated mecha series inspired by the dark sci-fi anime he had fallen in love with throughout his life. Many people daydream of creating their own ideal series, and Gray, knowing his position of power at the studio, had finally found the opportunity to make his dream a reality. This series would be GENLOCK, a mecha series set in a future war-torn Earth controlled by two main political factions: the Polity, a faction loosely based off the United Nations, and the Union, an opposing faction that fits under the non-specific flag of Eastern. Gray's main inspirations for the world and tone of GENLOCK were classic sci-fi anime like Ghost in the Shell and Mobile Suit Gundam. Though in his own words, the biggest inspiration would actually be the writing of Gen Urobuchi, wanting to capture the same nihilistic storytelling that the renowned director was known for, feeling that it would be a perfect fit for a cyberpunk-influenced mecha series. After receiving an initial allocation of resources to put the series into production, Gray would take up the mantle of both writer and director for this dream project of his. Only having experience as a voice actor in a handful of projects and a producer on RWBY prior to this, it was a massive new step in his career, but he felt confident in his ideas for the series. Perhaps a little too confident, as you'll soon come to learn. The central idea for the series was for it to be an ensemble-focused story about an international team of 5 young adults, hand-selected by the brilliant scientist Dr. Weller, to pilot new forms of technology, mecha called Hall-on Frames, machines remotely controlled through a program called GENLOCK. Think Captain Planet and the Planeteers, but with mechs the pilots project their consciousness into. He also wanted the series to take a mature dive into the relationship between man and machine, exploring the connection between the human brain and the body it occupies, asking the question of just how far our relationship with machines goes, and if one day those machine bodies will replace our own physical forms. Classic cyberpunk stuff. After some initial drafts of the series and its storyboards were complete, Gray would oversee a series of animatics in early 2018, focusing on the lead character, Julian Chase. In these tests, Chase was synced up to match dialogue from films Michael B. Jordan had starred in. Thinking that Jordan's voice fit perfectly for the character of Chase, Rooster Teeth would end up contacting Jordan's agent, who in turn would show him the pitch. Being a longtime fan of anime, he would jump at the opportunity to star in an upcoming mecha series, even taking up position as an executive producer under his production company, Outlier Society. With a Hollywood star as big as Michael B. Jordan now attached to the project, many more known television and film actors would be brought onto the voice cast. Dakota Fanning as Chase's former lover and ace pilot Miranda, Golshifteh Farahani as former Union citizen Yasmin Madrani, or Yaz for short, Asia Kate Dillon as the expert Russian sniper, Valentina, or Val, Macy Williams as the energetic Scottish hacker, Cammy McLeod, and David Tennant as Dr. Rufus Weller. All of these names would come with a massive cost, of course. but the attention it would bring to the new show seemed worth it. As 2018 drew to a close and the series was deep into production, RT Animation managed to pull prolific Japanese voice actor Koichi Yamadera to play the role of Japanese pilot Kazu. Everything seemed like it was coming up GENLOCK, and in early 2019, the show's first episode would be uploaded to YouTube, with the rest of the 8-episode series being uploaded exclusively to Rooster Teeth's own streaming service, RT First, a fifth-rate Netflix clone exclusively for Rooster Teeth produced content, in an effort to bring in a massive boost to subscription numbers. Season 1 of GENLOCK aired to a generally positive response from fans of Rooster Teeth itself, but it made minimal impact in the broader market, greatly underperforming compared to the studio's biggest show, RWBY, despite being a far more costly production. Though a deal with Toonami would give it a summertime TV block set right after dubbed episodes of Dragon Ball Super, giving it fairly decent television ratings, where it underperformed online. Rooster Teeth had also struck up a deal with DC Comics to produce a 7-issue GENLOCK comic set after the first season, penned by Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing. On top of this, Michael B. Jordan, with his personal and production company's investment in the show, believed it deserved a second season, as of course did its creator and lead, Gray. But 2019 was quite the eventful year after GENLOCK aired online for Gray, for all the wrong reasons. In June 2019, reports began to pop up en masse about dreadful working conditions at Rooster Teeth Animation. On the popular company review site Glassdoor, a large sum of reviews were uploaded from what appeared to be former Rooster Teeth staff that lambasted the company and its poor treatment of employees, especially in the animation department. Claims in these posts discussed the overworking of part-time employees, outright lying about full-time employment opportunities, severe crunch, substandard pay even for the infamously low-paying field of animation, and hours upon hours of unpaid overtime that lasted up to 4 AM. While many at first questioned the legitimacy of these reviews, Nomad Out of Nowhere creator Gordon Whitman would come forth to back up these claims, at this point being far removed from the studio himself. Rooster Teeth's then CEO Matt Hullum would also come forth with a statement expressing apologies to the workers of the animation department, and stated, "Effective today, we are moving forward with a previously planned change in our producing and creative structure. Gray G. Haddock is stepping down as head of studio for animation, to dedicate himself to a strictly creative role. With Gray's help, we have been in the process of hiring a new production head of the department, who will be responsible for the overall producer hierarchy and staff management. We want to thank Gray for his hard work and dedication to the growing animation studio over these years, and are excited to continue working with him in this new capacity." With Gray now pushed to the sidelines, come September 2019, he would leave Rooster Teeth for good, making a lengthy notes app post on his Twitter that stated that many of the claims of poor management under his leadership were simply inaccurate, and spread around to paint him as a villain and cause mass panic. But the information relating to Gray and the production of GENLOCK Season 1 would not stop with his departure from the company. Between September of 2019 and as recently as October of 2020, dozens of ex-Rooster Teeth Animation employees would begin to share their dreadful experiences at the studio. From Gordon Whitman releasing a lengthy document explaining how Nomad Out of Nowhere was basically stolen from him, reports of Gray being an extremely selfish team lead, who surrounded himself with yes-men, and was mostly concerned with getting his series completed at the risk of everybody else's health and well-being. And nearly 50% of GENLOCK Season 1's production being done entirely in unpaid overtime, leading to some members of GENLOCK's production crew developing full-on PTSD as a result of working heinous unpaid overtime hours, to a point where many of these staff members basically lived in the Rooster Teeth Animation studio, barely able to get a single moment of breathing room. And with more and more ex-employees speaking up every month, coming forward with the dreadful experience they had with company management, it's really not looking good for Gray and the Human Resources Department at the studio. And to top this off, Gray hasn't made a peep online since September of 2019 when he quit. If you're curious to read up on some of the terrible experiences that ex-employees had at the studio, I've linked 2 of the most damning and detailed posts in the description of the video. So with the truth of the horrible working conditions around the show, as well as the departure of its creator and lead, the future of GENLOCK seemed dead in the water. That was until, like a miracle, or more realistically a curse in this case, Rooster Teeth's parent company, Warner Media, along with Michael B. Jordan's Outlier Society, would greenlight the production of a second season of GENLOCK, though this season would be done without the direct involvement of most of Rooster Teeth Animation, as many of the staff members weren't told that the plan for the season was to have it outsourced to Bardell Animation. The studio that made Fanboy and Chum Chum and Planet Sheen. This shit was doomed from the start, bro. GENLOCK Season 2, or the worst mecha series I've ever watched, would begin airing with very little fanfare on HBO Max in November 2021. Now, since I've gone over the terrible production history of the first season, and have pretty much set the stage for why Season 2 is dreadful, I feel like it would be unfair to not give a quick summary of Season 1, and highlight some things it does well and not so well. Because GENLOCK Season 1 is a show I'm fairly neutral on. I don't feel very strongly for it one way or another. This video wouldn't exist if the production of Season 1 had been such a nightmare, and Season 2 had never come out, because otherwise it is a fairly middling show. But I feel to fully appreciate why Season 2 is as bad as it is, some groundwork needs to be set about what the events and character development of Season 1 were. This is going to be quick, but filled with spoilers for that first season. GENLOCK Season 1 is set in 2072, following the conflict between the Union and the Polity's military, the Vanguard. Specifically a new experimental science unit within the Vanguard, taking advantage of a new technology created by Dr. Rufus Weller called GENLOCK. A program that essentially allows the human brain to be digitized and projected into a giant mechanical body known as the Holon frame. The catch with GENLOCK is only those with extreme neuroplasticity are able to take advantage of the program, meaning that a very select few can actually pilot the Holon frames without receiving significant brain damage or dying. Two pilots already working with Dr. Weller are the ace pilot Julian Chase, a Vanguard soldier presumed to have died 4 years ago when the Union attacked New York City, who's now been rendered disabled with only his upper half surviving, permanently locked into a life support tube, and Yaz, a former Union citizen from Iran who had been confirmed as GENLOCK compatible. Aside from these two, 4 other pilots are brought on. Valentina from Russia, Cami from Scotland, Kazu from Japan, and Sinclair from the United States, who turns out to not actually be the real Sinclair, but a Union spy who got plastic surgery to look like him. His brain is pretty quickly fried because he's not GENLOCK compatible. It's not till a post-credit scene in the season finale where it's revealed that the real Sinclair is in fact very much alive, behind Union lines pretending to be one of their soldiers. With the 5 remaining GENLOCK compatible pilots brought together, a majority of the season follows their training process, highlighting how they slowly become more accustomed to being in their Holon frames, as well as learning to overcome 2 major hurdles. The first being a time limit created by Dr. Weller called uptime, a failsafe put in place to prevent a pilot from being jacked into GENLOCK for too long. For if a pilot was to stay in GENLOCK for a long enough time, there would be a chance that their conscience would separate from their human body, becoming permanently stuck as a digital construct within their Holon frame. And the second being learning how to navigate a shared digital reality called the Mind Space, a location within GENLOCK where the minds of all 5 pilots are synced together, meaning they can see each other's thoughts, feelings, and even hop into each other's frames for assisted attacks. Communication within this mind space has to be fully mastered by all 5 pilots to take full advantage of GENLOCK's capability. The season concludes with Dr. Weller sacrificing himself, and the GENLOCK team escaping to the headquarters of Artasa, a polity organization dedicated to the advancement of technology, led by Dr. Weller's former lover and the co-creator of GENLOCK, Dr. Ja. They then have a final battle against the Union's strongest mech, a 4-armed menace known as Nemesis, and it's revealed that within Nemesis is none other than the mind of Chase, the original Chase that died 4 years ago in New York City. As it turns out that the Chase we've been following for the entire season is a digital clone of the mind of the original Chase, who has since been corrupted and become a Union soldier, calling into question the morals of Dr. Weller, and leaving the Chase that we've been following for the entire show unsure of the legitimacy of his own existence. And with that recap out of the way, I'm now going to go over aspects of the season I like, and elements that I just think are outright bad. But let's start with the positives. The first being the actual animation. While the show is animated at 24 frames per second, giving it a slightly choppy look, this is something that a lot of CG anime do, and honestly, it works quite well in this show's case. It also helps that nearly every motion in the show feels really tangible and weighty. Nothing stops on a dime, everything has a sense of real inertia to it. This is especially true for the Holon frames. Since the Holons aren't mecha controlled by a typical cockpit, and are instead just larger metallic bodies for the characters to project into, the show does a really good job communicating the sense of disorientation the characters are feeling when they project into their Holons for the first time, and the smoother and more natural motions they're able to pull off as they master controlling their Holon bodies. This sense of weight and scale also translates to the fight scenes, which are all rather decently choreographed. The main standouts being the fights near the end of episode 6 and the final battle with Nemesis in episode 8. Both of these battles make clever uses of their settings, finding unique ways to highlight each pilot's specialty, letting each character's personality on the battlefield shine through, and giving them all an equal amount of screen time. The one downside to the animation is that it can look a little awkward on human characters at times. But with this being a mecha series, and the fights primarily focusing on military weaponry and these giant machines, I can somewhat look past janky animation on the humans, as the series at least does a decent job with its battles. Another aspect that stands out as pretty good in the series is its genuinely nice background art, with many of the show's background and establishing shots being handled through digital paintings, all of which are really pleasant on the eye. These backgrounds also do an excellent job showing the scale of the world, from a near-future New York City to the Vanguard's base of operations, the Anvil. Another strong element of the show's art direction is its hazy orange lighting that gives off the feeling of a hot summer evening. This solid choice of lighting is also compounded by the excellent sense of depth that the show's shadows bring. In general, you can really feel the work the art team put into making this world feel believable. Art director Michael Pedro and his team certainly deserve a nod for this. Another decent element of the show is Julian Chase himself, A solid amount of time is taken to exploring his conflicted emotional state throughout the season. The stress of having faked his own death for 4 years, while training in secrecy with Dr. Weller, has pretty much ruined all of his personal relationships. It's created a rift between him and his former colleagues, and it's left him in a frustrated state that makes it harder for him to adapt to his new team. These feelings are further compounded by the death of his sister and mother in the first episode, and the fact that his lower body has been entirely blown off, with his upper body needing a life support tube to survive, meaning that to move around the world and actually interact with his new team, he projects an image of himself with a close proximity hologram, illustrated by a decent effect where he's slightly transparent compared to the other characters. And with the season ending on the twist of the Chase that we've been following, simply being one of many digital clones from the original Chase of 4 years ago, the season does a really decent job of creating the feeling of a protagonist who's trying his best not to be as cynical as possible, while at the same time having him grapple with the trauma of feeling like he's not even a real person anymore, but simply an extension of a computer. Another solid character is Dr. Rufus Weller, a bit of a mad scientist. He personally believes that his GENLOCK program can be the future for humanity, truly bridging the gap between man and machine, though he understands well the dubious ethics of testing this technology out for military purposes first and foremost. He truly believes his technology can be used for the better, and he's straight up willing to play the part of a war criminal to have it tested and refined. It gives the character an interesting dilemma. Also, his robot companion, Caliban, is actually the best character in the show because he doesn't say a word. The mechanical design in the series is okay. While the basic design of the holoframes is actually rather practical, with all of them having the same silhouette with slight differences to help them stand out, the actual internal skeleton of the holoframes is just, it looks like a bionicle. I have no other way of wording this. And once the GENLOCK crew finally fully customizes their holons, the only design in this group I actually think looks good is Chase's, since it's a natural extension of the already existing appearance of the holoframes. The other 4 are just trying to capture elements from wildly different mecha subgenres in a way that doesn't blend at all. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, and probably the best thing in the show period, is the Union's own mech, Nemesis. This gangly 4-armed skeletal freak is menacing and has a silhouette that stands out from the other holons, but in a way that isn't distracting. It's a direct contrast to the more utilitarian look of the Vanguard's machinery. This thing is a monster and helps reinforce the feeling that the Union is this unstoppable freakish force. It's a distinct contrast to the rest of the machinery in the series that stands out in a really strong way. I love this thing and I wish it was in a better show. Now to talk about an element of the series I'm pretty down on, which is a bulk of the writing that doesn't involve Chase. When I compared the series to Captain Planet earlier, I meant that on more than a surface level. The actual depth of the GENLOCK crew, aside from Chase, is about as deep as a puddle. I don't think you need complex characters to tell a good story. Personally, I'm a fan of simple characters. In the right context, it can be exactly the kind of cast that the series needs. The problem is that GENLOCK tries to present itself as this grounded and mature sci-fi story about the relationship between man and machine, and the extent in which the human body ties into that. Yaz, Cammy, Valentina, and Kazu don't get close to a fraction of the time they would have needed to be fleshed out. The closest the show gives you is episode 4, where the characters relax together in virtual reality and get to know each other better. And even this sequence is cut short by a need to progress the primary narrative. It leaves you feeling disconnected to this cast of characters. How are we as an audience supposed to get invested in this story when Chase is the only one who gets the necessary screen time? You can really only describe each character by a single trait they exhibit. Yaz is stoic, Cammy is quirky, Kazu is a bit of an asshole, and Valentina or Val is snarky. Season 2 would try to rectify this by focusing more on these 4 and their lives before GENLOCK, as well as taking a deeper dive into who they are, and expanding off of the little they got in Season 1. And holy shit, the Season 2 fucked this up. To call the attempt it makes butchered is an understatement. Other side characters such as the mechanic Miguez, Chase's ex Miranda, and the Vanguard Colonel Marin also don't get enough development and screen time until they're shit on in Season 2 as well. GENLOCK Season 1 is really a show that entered one ear and left out the other. The only thing that stuck around in my mind was Nemesis, and it would have stayed this way as a pretty forgettable show that never got a second season to expand its world and cast, and one that certainly wasn't worth the millions of dollars sunk into it, and the horrendous working conditions the staff had to deal with. If anything, it would have ended as a cautionary tale about how Gray Haddock, in the strive to make his own dream series, ended up creating a financial failure and bombed his career in an attempt to feed his own ego. But this wasn't the end of GENLOCK. Gray was kicked off his own show, and it ended up getting a second season anyway. And that second season is quite possibly the worst mecha series I've ever watched.
It was only a matter of time before the Union developed tech you had already built, Dr. Weller. The ability to make copies of me. But unlike you, the Union had no moral problem churning them out and tossing them at us like grenades.
GENLOCK Season 2 is set a couple months after the events of Season 1. The Union has been using its thousands of copies of Chase to send an army of Nemesi out, and have taken control of the entire continental USA, aside from California where the GENLOCK team is currently hunkered down. Now at the end of their rope, it's fight or die as the GENLOCK team has to hold the Union back. A bulk of Season 2's runtime is spent on character development, as the team and the Vanguard are at their lowest point, having nearly been defeated by the Union, which on the surface is a great thing. Taking a darker, more defeated approach, and showing these characters at their lowest, should have been a great way to explore this cast, and stay more true to the series' initial cyberpunk influence. But that all immediately goes out the window after the prologue, as an immediate downgrade in everything about the show's visuals is very apparent. The dry, warm lighting from Season 1 is gone. Character animations are stiffer than a stale cookie. All of the models not directly carried over from Season 1 look horrendous. These goblin-ass rabbits live in my nightmares. And even the character models that are carried over from Season 1 are at risk of melting under the series' new terrible lighting. The show's also decided to ditch Season 1's letterboxing, filling in a full screen 16:9, and while this is understandable since it was made for HBO Max, Season 1 was also made exclusively for a streaming service, but decided to go for the letterboxing to give it a more cinematic look. And this also creates a problem when flashbacks to Season 1 happen in Season 2, because they decided to just zoom in on the footage, and man, it just looks crusty. In fact, everything about Season 2 is just ugly. And I mean that both in terms of narrative and its visuals. And yeah, I could talk about the unappealing surface level visual elements all day, but where this season is really dreadful is in its writing and its treatment of mecha as a genre. First off, Season 2 has decided that mecha fights in this mecha series are not important. This season loves keeping the characters out of their frames, and when it puts them in their frames, you only get a couple minutes of screen time tops. Now, I don't have a problem with a show where the mechs are the secondary focus. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of the genre. A good mecha series is only as good as its characters and world building. None of the mecha shows I've watched, and I actually mean none of them, are more about the robots than the characters. Hell, in many cases those robots are characters. But something you'll quickly realize about this season is that GENLOCK Season 2 kind of hates the fact that it's a mecha series. In the GENLOCK art book, series producer Ryan Hall states when referring to what makes GENLOCK special to him, what stood out about it is that it wasn't just a mech show. It was a show that was driven by characters. Above my office door, I had a sign that reads, "Characters Only." That's what I care about, and that was the special sauce the show had figured out. In my life, I don't think I've ever seen an official art book for a mecha series straight up use the argument, unlike other shows, this one is about the characters. I felt like I was actually going insane reading through this art book. Every page turn, just like, I'm going off script. Every page turn made my brain feel like it was about to fucking melt. I truly believe that Gray, for as horrendous of a boss as he was the only person on this show's upper management who understood what a mecha series is. And with him gone, oh man was the show in worse hands. Because under the new umbrella of HBO Max, what wonderful decisions did GENLOCK Season 2 make to make itself seem more mature? Poorly animated sex scenes that look like two Barbie dolls bumping against each other. Season 2 had such low viewer retention that one of the few things I had ever heard before going into it was this plywood-ass sex scene. Everybody took the piss out of this. It was such a laughable attempt at trying to make the show seem more mature and at home at HBO, and was met with open disapproval by some of the Season 1's animators.
All right. This is something dear to my heart, and I just gotta say something. Because what is this, right? I don't really agree with a lot of the Season 2 stuff, but I still fucks with it, right? So we boot up GENLOCK today, and spoiler alert, whatever the fuck or whatever, I might be saving you from some bullshit. What the fuck is this shit? What is this? And you know what? Hey, maybe this isn't professional of me or whatever, but this is my opinion on something that I really look up to and feel some way about because I was with those artists in the trenches, animating on the first season or whatever. I respect them and I look up to them or whatever. And, they worked hard and they made, shit like this. Some cool fucking mech shit. This is my scene right here. Look at that, right? And it ain't even about me, right? Let's skip past. This is one of my favorite scenes right here, right? Kazu, on Val, they do the mind share, that he do on the outside is a reflection of their teamwork on the inside. And that's why I fucked with the show. I was like, this is a cool ass idea. These animators is killing this. Look at this. He got the little look. Back and forth to the cool action on the outside. All the, Cammy PTSD stuff, the chase stuff, all that is cool stuff. Cammy jumping over, she big. Look at this. She's going to do the cool skating next to the Jeeps. Look at this. Camera all smooth with the hot kick. How the fuck did we come from this to this?
So,
what is this? And it ain't even about this scene. The whole show is like this. Like, it's just random and fucking stiff and fucking awkward. Like, I really just don't understand it, and it's very upsetting because I look up to everybody who worked on, you know, this first season with all this dope stuff, all this dope little story. But because they could do it, strictly because they could do it, they put this garbage, trash ass scene in here. Why? Like, what? Whatever. That's just my 2 cents. That's my opinion. Like I said, professional or not, this is some bullshit. I ain't even gonna hold you.
Sex and blood doesn't make a story more mature. That comes from a story's themes and the contents of its writing. And while GENLOCK Season 2 promised to be darker than Season 1, its version of dark aside from sex and blood was just being outright mean-spirited. GENLOCK Season 2 feels like it has an active contempt for its cast. In Season 1, Yaz, Val, Kazu, and Cammy didn't get much. So to make up for this, Season 2 ruins pretty much all of them except for Yaz. And even with that, Yaz gets tied up into the story of the season's main villain, Brother Tate. Oh, and I'll get to Brother Tate, don't worry. But first, I want to address the treatment of Kazu. So when you get Koichi Yamadera to be a voice actor for your series, you better treat him right or give him a fun role. And GENLOCK Season 2 treats Kazu like a garbage dump, giving him an insulting character arc. For some context, the little he got in Season 1 was tied directly into Valentino or Val's story. In Episode 4 of Season 1, while the team is getting to know each other, there's a reveal that Valentina is actually gender fluid and goes by Val when presenting as masculine. Instead of simply establishing this as part of their character, the show has white girl Cammy explain word for word to Kazu what gender fluidity is, and it's one of the worst moments of Season 1, because it directly treats a character who's living in the year 2072 like they don't know what variant identities are. And it feels like it's targeting Kazu, treating him as some sort of stereotype of an ignorant foreigner. And this wasn't the only time this happened in the first season. There were jokes about Kazu's name sounding like Kazoo. Cammy would ask him about manga he's read. When he first sees the Hall frames, he says word for word, "Whoa, this is just like one of the anime I grew up with." It made it feel like the show was pointing and going, "Haha, this guy's Japanese. Isn't that so funny? What a quirky country they are." But these were all small moments in Season 1 that didn't affect the bigger picture. Season 2 is outright offensive with it. The emotional conflict from Season 2 for all 5 members of the GENLOCK crew centers around how too much time in the mind space has caused everybody's personality, memories, and emotion to start overlapping. For Kazu, it appears that his avatar within the mind space now has a female body, for which he quickly blames mind sharing with Cammy and Val. And it turns out, all of this is an allegory for toxic masculinity. I really wish I was kidding, but the show tries to explore Kazu's past in a way that vastly contradicts what happened in the comic book, essentially rendering that entire thing non-canon, exploring how his father never fought back against the local Yakuza when they tried to extort him. This led to a young Kazu seeing his father as a weakling. As a child, Kazu found comfort within the old anime he used to watch, specifically a mecha series called Robo Shogun. The show and his upbringing instilled in him that vulnerability was only for women and the elderly, giving him a pretty toxic understanding of the world. And the show goes out of its way to grossly misrepresent 70s and 80s mecha series, presenting them as needlessly graphic and sexist, in a way in which you can tell that nobody on this writing team had ever watched a single episode of one of these shows. Most classic mecha series tried to instill a very important lesson into the young boys watching, about self-confidence and strength, as well as camaraderie. Toxic or braggadocious characters would often be portrayed as weak or foolish. This all loops around to an explanation that the reason why Kazu has a female avatar is because he feels vulnerable. And vulnerability is a sign of femininity according to his old mecha shows. At first, I thought the show was going for a different kind of allegory with this. But when it quickly made itself apparent that this was supposed to be about masculinity, I had the slimmest hope that they would maybe get it right. No, instead of doing an interesting exploration of masculinity and aggression, the show uses it as an opportunity to shit all over retro anime. I don't know how this happened. I cannot figure for the life of me how this writer's room let this happen. Because immediately after this, while Val tries to help Kazu and help him come to an understanding that vulnerability is okay, and is a pretty important part of being a man in general, you know what, gay? You are okay.
Wrong, Oleg. I'm pansexual.
And then they have blunt rotation sex, and then Kazu dies not even 5 minutes later. I wish I was kidding. This is not only a gross mistreatment of a character that was already treated like a joke by the show, but it's also just nonsensical to kill off a character right after their arc had finished. Episode writer Crystal Peluso explained on an episode of a GENLOCK Season 2 podcast produced by Rooster Teeth that she decided to end the episode in this manner to highlight the tragedy and unforgiving nature of war, feeling that a major character death was necessary, and it had to be Kazu, as his arc had completed that episode. Crystal, you seemed like a lovely person. What the fuck was this? I've only gotten more frustrated about the heinous treatment of Kazu as a character as time's gone on, as recently ex-Rooster Teeth employee Kaden revealed that Warner, HBO, and RT's higher-ups knew that this story arc would go over horribly with viewers. And it did. Viewership dive-bombed after this episode happened. Because everybody, regardless of how you interpreted Kazu's arc, was furious about the treatment of his character. So Caden raised concern. In response, Rooster Teeth said, "We know, controversy is good though." What do you mean controversy is good? No one was watching this show! And the problems certainly don't stop at Kazu, because by being involved with this terrible arc, Val gets screwed over too, because they get pretty much nothing in the way of plot relevance after this happens. And what about Chase? He was the best part of Season 1. He was a solid character. Well, Season 2 tries to highlight the trauma he's been through. After having killed so many of his digital clones, he's at a breaking point and begins to see a manifestation of the Nemesis in the form of some red demon, haunting him at every moment. A very literal devil on his shoulder. And I would have been able to take his arc in Season 2 more seriously if he hadn't constantly had the Brendan Fraser just fuck my shit up face. And if the series had actually taken a split second of time to actually explore how Chase is feeling in these scenes. Because Season 2 rushes through this, packing what's essentially the equivalent of 4 seasons into one. So much happens in this season, and all of it is meaningless. And that sucks, because Chase's arc here could have been good. Evan Narcisse was the primary writer for Chase throughout the entire series, helping Gray with Season 1, and writing about 2 episodes of Season 2. And Narcisse is not a bad writer. He's seen success in the medium of comic books and video games. It just feels like he wasn't given a fraction of enough time to do what he wanted with Chase here. And that sucks, because it disconnects me from the only character I actually cared about. And now to talk about easily the worst part of this season's story, its antagonists. GENLOCK Season 2 has 2 central villains. Mark Holcroft, a rich CEO who serves as the de facto leader of the polity, and Brother Tate, the leader of the Union. And both of their motivations involve saving the human race from a climate crisis. A climate crisis which is never brought up in the first season. Season 2 just decides to have a different central conflict. The war between the Union and the polity? Oh yeah, that happened because Vanguard Colonel Marin ordered a strike on the Union capital, New Babylon. A city that looks like it has a Mario 64-ass skybox. And you know what? This attack was unprovoked. So then the Union starts using its destructive nanotechnology to chew through and take over polity territory. Holcroft is just a scummy rich CEO, trying to get more rich people onto a colony he built on Mars, so that they can avoid the coming climate collapse. The war's just here to line his pockets and distract from the fact that the Mars colony is a complete fabrication. Just ignore the fact that this character barely got introduced in Season 1, and just ignore the fact that the Union has comically evil looking technology. But they're still the bad guys too, don't worry about it. Look at their leader, Brother Tate. He's a religious maniac who wants to take every religion in existence, fuse it all into one called the Omnifaith, and use his nanotechnology to get everyone to die, and ascend to his version of Nano Heaven, again, to avoid the coming climate collapse. And you know how you do this? By taking your own life using these nanobots. Wanna know why the original Chase copy from Season 1 was evil? It's because Brother Tate didn't let him ascend. He made him stay and suffer in his robot body and flipped a literal evil switch. Yaz and Cammy's character arcs directly tie into Brother Tate. With Yaz, the show cuts back and forth between present time and 2068, when she was still a citizen of New Babylon, showing how she decided to escape from the Union after her parents partook in Brother Tate's ascension ceremony, seeing the Omnifaith as an insult to religion, and Brother Tate for the cult leader that he is. As for Cammy's arc, oh boy. So throughout the season, she feels neglected by the team, and hated for her overly positive outlook. So after Kazu dies, she hits a breaking point, escapes to New Babylon, and decides, you know what? This ascension shit sounds pretty good. And then she kills herself using the nanotechnology. All set to a sad musical montage of her family dying of disease one by one, and how the loss of the GENLOCK team as her new family has driven her to this point. She also leaves her little robot buddy behind. She just leaves it! It's crying! Her little robot friend cries about this. And then that episode has the gall to end by showing you the suicide hotline prevention number. What the fuck is wrong with this show? And the worst part, she comes back later because the nanotechnology fused with a GENLOCK compatible person means that she comes back as a magic cyber god. And the show literally ends trying to make a point of, we should all become GENLOCK compatible and fuse with the nanobots so that we can all become undying nano gods too. Oh yeah, there's an entire subplot I didn't mention about how the science team is trying to find out a way to unlock GENLOCK compatibility in everybody with a program called Unlock. And this is explained in the first episode when the character that Gray voiced in Season 1 is just killed off without a word being said. Honestly, that's pretty funny in a really fucked up way. But yeah, the show ends on the note of, maybe we should all just die. Low Tier God's infamous rant is literally the message that this series leaves you off with.
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now and give somebody else a piece of that oxygen and ozone layer that's covered up so that we can breathe inside this blue trapped bubble. Because what are you here for? To worship me? Kill yourself. I mean that with 100%, with 1,000%.
I'm done talking about GENLOCK. I don't want to think about this series anymore. I don't want to even talk about this ugly ass thing or the weird body horror in season 2. I also don't give a rat's ass about Sinclair's story arc. Screw all of you who voted for me to talk about this in a Twitter poll, and I am never making a video this unprofessional ever again. I just had to get this one done. If you want a good CG mecha web series, I don't know. Moral of the story, just go watch Obsolete.